for your perseverance. I'm going to talk about the flip side of the story. What happens when we talk about information and data in the case of research that is a failure, meaning a dead end? How do we approach the idea of protecting information in these contexts? So, thus far, we've looked at the right to approach, the right approach to the right to research, but what happens, as I said, when the challenge becomes such that we basically need to think about the value of failure as a research resource? This is based on a published paper dealing with the issue of what I refer to as negative trade secrets, and essentially research is all about discovery and innovation, right? So essentially when we invent, we accumulate knowledge and we share what we invent with the world because of the knowledge we have already attained. So in the case of failure, we are basically not only navigating uncharted waters in the sense that we're discovering new stuff, we get to a place where the research itself reaches a dead end, yet we have in our midst a critical mass of information and research that we term simply as failure, right? So it may be kind of a counterproductive for us to expect the failing party to share the information, because no one wants to share the information of failure, thus make it simple for the inventors or the competitors to actually benefit from that. The logic behind the story is that we look at the success above the water and we actually kind of give less consideration, as it were, to the failure and everything that is beneath. And in essence, that is the larger part of the story of research. And so information under the water, as it were, in terms of mass and knowledge, is actually much bigger than the one that is above, namely what we see in the patent domain, what we see in the patent system being offered to us vis-a-vis disclosure and vis-a-vis the description, everything else that entails the protection of data. So how do we protect failure? Well, obviously by trade secrets. You made a brief mention of it. We think of trade secrets as a way to actually improve society in the sense that we can harness the information without having to register it. We do not have to essentially incur any costs for its protection. It's essentially automatic by virtue of making reasonable efforts to keep it secret. It creates actually a very vibrant work environment because people are not afraid, as it were, to share information, and in a way, an atmosphere of trust. So trade secrets as such is a good mechanism, but it actually fails, I think, to provide the solution when we talk about information actually has this, upside or downside, as it were, depending on how you look at it, of being the description of failure rather than the success. And so it becomes negative information. And that, in my view, need not rest in the private domain, but actually in the public domain. It should be open. Now, again, that would sound, in a way, counterintuitive, right? We would not want to share information with people, as I already mentioned, because research entities aim to stay ahead. There's no, we're not kind of in a game of trying to escape, God forbid, a room on fire or a building on fire where we have to share information, but rather we're in a maze, and anyone getting first out is the winner, right? So we're not going to share the maze map, as it were, with others. So why should we share, and how can we actually effectively share? Now take a hypothetical scenario. You have two research parties, A and B. Research A makes the mistake X, rather dead end or any kind of unwanted outcome. Whereas research B makes the mistake Y. If they do not share together what they have failed, this will be replicated by a 2x and 2y outcome. That's why AI systems learn fast and we don't, because we're linear and we are separate, mostly. Where this is, by the way, the antithesis to competition, right? This is the sharing of information. But in general, we work separately as entities. So that is a very important factor. In fact, it's not only the A and B. That's how we function in industry, different companies making different dead ends and success stories. Some are shared vis-a-vis these lines of patent disclosure, and others are actually within the space lost, okay? And so though we have a kind of neural network, it's a negative one. It's one that is actually not efficient. And that's why we are in a Sisyphus race. We keep making and replicating the same mistake, right? Up the hill, down the hill, but this time he's not pushing a stone, he's pushing something in industry for the engineers in the room. Okay, so while trade secrets are about exclusivity, keeping everyone out, negative information is actually about inclusivity. It's about sharing this information. And so the benefits of inclusivity are quite obvious to my understanding. They are essentially creating a microeconomic level of benefit to the business research environment, ecosystem. They basically open the entire market to failure, thus preventing this kind of Sisyphic work structure that we still have. And as such, we move faster down the road of success by not having to replicate the mistakes. Now, even if you kind of buy into that, I think it's the correct and logical approach to failure in research or how to deal with failed research. But the question persists, how do you cause a certain entity, business entity, research entity, to actually play into this game that is counterintuitive? And the way I think about it, or I see it in the proposed model, which by the way is actually now a platform in the making to become a business platform, is how do you deal, how do you bring company to actually play the game? And the simple structure is the following. You commodify failure, and you allow companies to offer what they have to potential buyers. But instead of the abstract and the patent being one describing a successful outcome, it's actually describing data that is harnessed briefly, and then you buy into that. Now, the intuitive question would be, why would I actually buy a cat in the bag, as it were? And the reason is that I am, the seller being a repeat player, very keen on maintaining my reputation that when I sell something that is of a redundant value or negative value, people will actually buy because they trust what I have valued it at. So it becomes an incentive for me to quantify, or rather to value the failure to a position where the buyer is actually getting more for his money. So if my research was 100 million lost, i.e. I'm researching bridges, wind, turbulence, etc., and I have made no use or no real progress, and my startup shuts down or my company fails at the project, well, I may sell it to an avionics company researching wings, meaning the same potential of information. Now, if I invested 100 million, I may offer it for 20. I'm happy for getting some of my losses back. They're happy for getting a lot of information for quite cheap, and i.e. saving time for themselves. And it's a market. Obviously, the market does what the market does with the invisible hand, as it were, and the outcome will be such that the market will evaluate things, and things will have, at the end of the day, a kind of fair market value, just as we do with market shares when we trade stocks. So public good is an aspect of trade secrecy, but here it's on the inverse side. It's saying we do not protect because it actually is not the beneficial approach. TRIPS has already a space, at least on the conceptual side, wherein it is stated that members shall protect such data against disclosure, except, that's where I kind of come in, where necessary to protect the public health, or unless steps are taken to ensure that the data are protected against unfair commercial use. I should have said actually public and not public health, which essentially is the broader term, and that's what the term used in TRIPS. And that's where we come in. We think that these ideas will benefit society at large, hence they could actually be expelled, or rather accepted from the general approach of how secrecy should be handled. So the market in failure, the market with respect to failure and research outcomes empowers and reinvigorates the right to research, and indeed creates a right to an ecosystem to exercise this right to maximize its benefits. And so my story is an inverse iceberg. It actually is the success and failure. That's how we should look at the world. Not only celebrate our success and protect the data and share it because it's already disclosed, but rather to look for this massive chunk which we have kind of missed. And that's probably one of the biggest, I think, resources today in the market. Thank you.